I was diagnosed a type 1 diabetic at 11 years old. I didn't quite understand the carb exchanges they were teaching me. My insulin was a result of trial and error and many logs. My basic development of nutrition consisted of using the U.S. food pyramid. I started with starches and grains and then added stuff going up the pyramid. I used margarine and cooked with vegetable oil, avoiding butter and other saturated fats. I took 2 shots a day with a mixture of R and N insulin. My blood sugars were completely erratic. If my sugar dropped, I ate. If my sugar was high, I didn't. So for the most part, I ate to my insulin. My hemoglobin A1Cs were around 6.5 on average, which compares to about a blood sugar of 140 milligrams per deciliter. My feet ached often. I looked at a flight of stairs as a long, arduous task to complete, being exhausted and out of breath once completed. I felt diabetes was catching up with me. It wasn't until the age of 40 that I switched from a family doctor to an endocrinologist for my diabetes care. There was a lot I didn't understand about diabetes. The whole insulin-carbohydrate relationship was, for the most part, unknown to me. This is when I changed from 2 shots of RNN per day to basal bolus therapy by multiple daily injection. This lasted about 6 months. I was approved for an insulin pump with Novolog insulin that functioned as the same as basal bolus therapy. My blood sugars were still all over the place. Basal bolus therapy didn't seem any better than the 2 shots a day I was previously taking. My younger sister was diagnosed with latent autoimmune diabetes of adults while pregnant with her 3rd child. She did basal bolus therapy with multiple daily injections. Shortly thereafter transitioned to an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitor. I compared CGM graphs with my sister's and asked her how she could stay so level with her blood sugars. That's when she told me about Dr. Bernstein and the low-carb, high-fat way of eating. I set up a plan to switch to the low-carb, high-fat lifestyle. I even saw my endocrinologist when starting. He was okay with lowering my carbs, but was concerned about increasing my fat intake. I was encouraged to eat a few less carbs. I tried that, but it didn't level out my blood sugars.
Getting a person to switch to a low-carbohydrate diet, which is essential. There's no way to control blood sugars on a high-carbo diet. You have to do it fast, all at once. Otherwise, it takes forever. Those where you change them immediately, they lose the cravings and you forge ahead, and they see the results. When patients see the payoff, they stick with it.
I went all out and followed Dr. Bernstein's plan at about 30 carbs a day. It worked like a charm. My blood sugar straightened out. For the first time since becoming a diabetic, I felt I had the upper hand on this autoimmune affliction of mine. A curious thing happened though. My first lipid panel came back with baffling results. Although my HDLs went up and my triglycerides went down, my LDL numbers went extremely high. My endo kind of freaked out about it. Advised me to go back to the high-carb meals I was previously eating. The exchanging carbs for fat was doing more harm than good. The diabetics die from heart attack and stroke, and I was putting myself at risk. So the dilemma begins. Is following a low-carb, high-fat diet more dangerous than riding a blood sugar roller coaster? Is turning me from a carb zombie to an awake and balanced individual with normal blood sugars really a detriment to my health? That's very difficult for me to believe.
So what do we know? Cholesterol is vital for life. The cholesterol we eat actually has very little to do with the cholesterol in our body. The problem actually occurs when cholesterol, or another sterol, gets into an artery wall macrophage. The only way this happens is if they are carried there by an ApoB bearing lipoprotein. A particle is a particle is a particle. So please don't fixate on the size of the particle, and don't fixate on the concentration of cholesterol within the particle. You need fewer boats if your boats can carry more of their intended cargo. Last point I want to make is something that's not clear to me. So just to sort of bear my insecurity, there's a very important question I don't know the answer to, and I've not been able to find this answer yet, which is an LDL particle count of 2,000 millimoles per nanomoles per liter is very high. It's the 99th percentile. So if a card-carrying lipidologist encountered a patient with an LDL-P of 2,000, they wouldn't let them leave the office without 2 drugs. It just simply, it's malpractice, right? The question is, what does an LDL-P of 2,000 mean in someone who is heavily restricted in, at the very least, sugar, if not carbohydrates in general? Does it portend the same cardiovascular risk? I don't know. But what I do know is I have seen a subset of patients that I've worked with who, despite a low carbohydrate diet, still maintain a high particle count, despite a profound improvement in other metabolic factors, including a reduction in CRP, a reduction in perhaps the most specific inflammatory marker I can think of, which is Lp(PLA2). That's a marker of inflammation right at the wall of the artery. Myeloperoxidase, you name it. So everything improves. Their insulin sensitivity improves, their inflammation improves, and yet they still have a ton of particles. And again, the question I don't know the answer to is, does it matter? Maybe.